Takes.
It's Green Takes. Today we're talking about a little movie called Pearl.
Pearl, down here at the green corner.
We are. I want to talk about Pearl, but I think we're due to quickly touch on X.
We do have to, and I think it's going to come up.
I think it's going to come up. Now, this is Green Takes, where we normally cover new releases. This wasn't really a new release. I think this movie came out a year ago, but we just saw it now. So we're covering it as if it's a new release.
And if you want more reasons why, go look at movies out right now. Scroll through them. Here's some, for example.
Yes, it was basically, do we want to go watch a movie from a year ago or The Beekeeper? And, we took our shot, and we both been meaning to watch Pearl. So it was kind of a logical, still relatively new, let's go watch it and do a Green Takes on Pearl. Now, Pearl is actually a follow-up film to the film X by the same director, same star. It's directed by Ty West.
It's a prequel.
Yes, so Pearl is a prequel, but also a follow-up film to X. Basically, X, there was an old creepy woman named Pearl in it, and Pearl is the story of her as a young woman. So, Tuco. The dog is walking around the set. Just sit down over there now.
We're leaving all this in.
Come on. Outside.
I'll film some B-roll of me reacting so Reid can just use it. Good point. I don't think so.
So yeah, we both watched X around when it came out. We hadn't watched this yet. So I guess before we leap into Pearl, we're not gonna do a full review of X, but I guess we'll touch on it. I think we had very different experiences because I saw X like the week it came out on streaming. I saw the cover, I knew nothing about it. And I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And I know Mia Goth.
Yep.
And I saw it was directed by Ty West, who I knew because he directed a segment from the film VHS. He did one of the shorts, and it was really good. So I was like, oh, it's that guy. I'll check out his new feature. So I had no expectations going in, and I thought it was really good, because I literally went in blind. It was kind of a typical slasher, more in the vein of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it had a little more going on. I thought the performances were good, characters were good, and the whole themes it tackled around kind of aging and love and sex were very unique in the horror genre. So going in totally blind, I had a great time with it. I thought it was really good. Then it kind of surged in popularity and got super hyped up on the internet, which I think is when you saw it.
Yes. So I saw X and I was underwhelmed, and it was because my expectations were too high and I don't think it was totally fair. X is definitely unique. There's not a lot of stuff like it. It's interesting. There's a lot of ideas in there. For me, they just didn't all quite add up to a satisfying movie. I think it's like not that good as a horror movie. It's not that fresh. It's not like the themes aren't. There's a lot of things that are kind of 6 out of 10 to it. And there's more. It's definitely better if you go in expecting just like a low budget indie director horror movie. It's better than that.
Yeah.
But I kind of went in with my head thinking like Barbarian, right? Like this, like super hyped internet or Talk to Me.
Yeah.
Right. This hyped internet darling indie horror movie that's gonna blow my mind, and it was just pretty good.
Yeah, and I think going in with those expectations is gonna hurt it.
Yeah.
But we both liked it well enough, at least, to want to see the follow-up.
Absolutely, and I'm glad we did. Funnily enough, I knew Ty West as the guy who gets shot with a crossbow at the start of You're Next, which I found out about. He's the annoying boyfriend man.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, he didn't direct that, I don't think. He was just in it.
No, he didn't direct that.
No.
So yeah, we'll get into our first thoughts and the review. I guess we should quickly say, what is Pearl? It's the story of a young girl growing up in one of the southern states in the US, set to the backdrop of World War I with the Spanish flu going on. And she basically has dreams of being a dancer, going to Europe, having a glamorous life of being she wants everyone to know her name. But she's very much tied down to a rural farmsteading life. Her father is completely disabled and needs constant care, and her mother is a very hard and judicious German woman who had a hard life and is very hard on Pearl. And it's basically the story, it's more or less a coming-of-age story where Pearl slowly descends into madness, because it is a horror movie, despite how the movie kind of starts. It gets horrific. So that's the general plot. I guess we're stay spoiler-free for now. What did you think of Pearl?
I have to say I didn't love it. I respect Pearl. I think it did some cool stuff. What I can say about Pearl versus X, I guess, I think that Pearl took what was unique about X and kind of doubled down on it and didn't try as hard to be a conventional horror movie, which is something that I don't think X did a great job of anyway.
Okay.
So if you liked X, if that was a movie that really spoke to you, I thought Pearl took a lot of that further. It leaned into the strengths of X, which I respect, and I think it did do those things well. For me, I think it, even more than X, just didn't quite add up to a movie for me and like a satisfying experience. There are pieces I can point to that I really liked, but on the whole, just didn't get there as a project for me.
Yeah, I think we're gonna be kind of similar on this one. I actually had the exact same thought that I respect it more than I liked it. There are technical aspects in this that I love.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful, and there are things they pulled off that we'll get into when we get into the kind of more meat of it. Specific technical aspects, the camera work, the color grading that were like insanely impressive. And I'm glad I watched it just to experience some of those aspects.
Yeah.
But at a plot level, having something to think about after and chew on, it didn't give me a lot. I think we've said on the show before, but it left me a little cold.
Yeah.
So I loved a lot of technical aspects. I don't know there was enough meat to justify a feature length. You kind of alluded to. I think this would have been a great short.
Yeah.
And because it was a prequel and you kind of know where it's going to go if you've seen X, that also hurt it because I kind of know the confines. And I know that this movie spun out of, they shot this while they were shooting X.
And it was like secret, right? They secretly filmed, just the director and Mia Goth went off and just did this whole other movie.
Yeah, and kind of just hoped they'd get funding, and they did, so they ended up getting it made. And it feels like that. Like, it feels like a side project. It's like, we're here anyways, let's shoot some more stuff. The technical aspects seem way too good for that story.
Right.
But the storyline lines up exactly with that being how it was created. Because it's kind of like, there wasn't like a story to tell. It was just a character study, more or less, right? So. And
I think character study is a good way to put it. I mean, I'm sure we'll dig more into it, but I mean, Mia Goth is an incredible actress, puts in a fantastic performance. But a lot of this movie did just kind of feel like Mia Goth and the director were just kind of like, let's just try it, you know?
Yeah, wouldn't this be cool?
I'm just going to point this at you for 5 minutes and just talk about this. And then just go stand over there and dance around for a while. We'll see what we get.
Yeah.
Which is fun.
And then make a lot of it up in editing.
Yeah.
Like in post-production, I agree.
It's fun. Like, she's a fun person to watch on screen. It's just, it doesn't seem that there was much of a like cohesive vision. Yeah. This isn't like a thrill ride.
No.
It's just, just following this lady around.
Yeah.
A weird lady.
Yep, and this movie does not work without her.
No. Oh my God. If she's even like mediocre, this is just a terrible
Falls apart.
movie.
She's like one of the reasons you stick through it, and there are parts that are worth watching for her. She's incredible.
Terrible, awful, murderous things.
But I guess that's kind of our initial thoughts. Medium, mixed bag, kind of disappointed. I liked X a lot more, but I also liked X a lot more than you did.
Yeah.
I guess we should get into it. This is Green Takes, so as always, let's talk about the good. What did you like about this, Avery? Let's go through the good, starting with you.
So, probably my favorite thing about this movie was that it is just kind of joyful in a way that I enjoyed. I mean, plot, whatever, some of the choices, but the color gradient was just beautiful. Like, you just look at this movie, it is the exact opposite of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, which I cannot watch. I'm just going to pick that as an example of a movie that is literally ruined by the color gradient.
Yeah.
Unwatchable gray garbage.
I think I've said this before on the show, but a gray nightmare.
Yes.
I think it's a term we can
A gray-green mess of nothing.
Yeah.
This is the exact opposite, where every single frame you just look at and you're like, wow, look at that.
It looks like The Wizard of Oz.
It looks like The Wizard of Oz. Is obviously heavily inspired by The Wizard of Oz.
Kind of like the dark Wizard of Oz.
She I'm sure I missed some of them, but I mean, there's a scene with a scarecrow. She wears Dorothy outfits. It's set on a little foot. There's a lot of...
Even her makake and hair is very Dorothy-esque.
Yeah, this is right there. They're very much trying to evoke that.
Please, Lord, make me the biggest star the world has ever known, so that I'll make it far, far away from this place.
But I just liked scene to scene, moment to moment. I just like looking at this movie.
Yeah.
It sounds good. It looks beautiful. It's just fun. And it takes itself the right amount of seriously too.
It's like the shots of her riding into town, going to the candy shop, going to the movie theater. I could just watch that on mute, and that was worth the price of admission. So I didn't love this movie, but that was awesome. And between the set design and the color grading. So I read Ty West wanted this in black and white.
Yeah.
And A24 wouldn't go for it. So he said, if we can't do black and white, what else feels era appropriate? So he's like, let's go for the hard, saturated. I think Technicolor was one of the names of the technologies at the time that like color grading that looks like this. It looks like a film from the 30s or 40s with those rich, saturated colors. They nailed that aesthetic.
And it was even beyond just the camera settings. This is the kind of thing I wouldn't normally notice or that you might just kind of skip past. But the scene in the alleyway next to the movie theater where there's just some pipes coming out, they're painted like hot pink and green.
I noticed that.
And it just took me a minute, and I was just like, is this Willy Wonka? Like,
Yes.
what's happening?
I had that exact same thought. I'm like, they're pushing this surrealism, which is funny because Pearl sees the world so darkly and so with such pessimism, yet the way we're seeing it through her lens is like a wonderland. And it's a funny kind of dichotomy there, I found.
I will not let you leave this farm again.
Call out performances. Mia Goth, we already talked about. She's amazing, but her mom
Yes.
blew me away. And I read she was actually the intimacy coordinator on X.
No way.
And I don't know if she had history acting or if she was in the industry, but she was not there to be a professional actor. But she got talking with them, and I guess somehow ended up auditioning for this part, and they gave it to her. She's from New Zealand, which is where this is shot, and does the most like amazing German accent I think I've ever heard in a movie.
Yeah.
And her performance blew me away, like on par with Mia Goth.
She didn't speak German before this. She learned
Really?
German for this role.
Wow.
I read that one, and that was bananas.
I would have bet $100 this was a tenured German actress.
Yeah.
Like from Germany.
It's like Christoph Waltz.
Yes.
like they just found her.
Yeah.
But no, she's just a Kiwi who learned it for this role, and yeah.
She's amazing. I mean, all the performances are great. Even the guy she meets in the theater, he's really solid. Not Henry Cavill, I guess I could call him.
Yeah, just handsome guy.
Handsome guy. But every performance is really good, and that carries a lot of this movie when there's not much going on plot-wise.
We've listed 3 out of the 4 performances just full stop. There's just blonde lady.
Yeah, and I mean, her
the only other
dad plays
person.
a guy who can't move, but he does a convincing job of
Fair
that.
enough.
Like, the performances are really good. This was shot during COVID, so it's very, very small scale in terms of how many actors. Something this movie does really interestingly that I want to talk about is there's a subgenre of films that are kind of become known as the edgelord movies. So examples of this would be Taxi Driver,
Boondock Saints.
Boondock Saints, yeah, but more recently the biggest one would be like Joker.
Yeah.
Movies that are typically a white male protagonist who was sold a fantasy of what their life would be. Normally it's the American dream. You will be rich, successful, handsome, beautiful wife, white picket fence. And our characters have realized they will not achieve that, or they lose that. And they, instead of take responsibility for that or look at what they might have done to cause that, they blame society. It's basically the "we live in a society" meme as the thesis.
Okay. Yes. Like,
And the characters lash out against society and rebel, and it's very ambiguous whether they are heroes or basically watching the creation of a incel or school shooter. Like,
Right.
it's really rides that line. There's a great video by F.D Signifer that I'll link below that dives into the edgelord subgenre and kind of deconstructs them and talks about some of the kind of troubling concepts it brings up.
Patrick Bateman's and your Tyler Durden's.
All
and
of
your-
these.
Yeah.
There's great films in this subgenre, but there's also some concerning themes and patterns. He talks about it much more eloquently. I'll link it below. The reason I'm bringing this up is this movie took the framework of the edgelord, but applied it to a female perspective.
Yeah.
And I found that fascinating.
I like the idea, and from what I can tell, it worked for some women, like much more so. Like I knew a lot more women who were really excited about Pearl and X than I did men, and that's kind of unusual for niche horror movies. Like,
Yeah,
I'll just
that's
say it.
true.
And I can't really speak to this, but it does seem like this movie, to some degree, did resonate with some women in the way that Joker or something like it may have resonated with some men.
Yeah, and it's just so interesting because you take the framework being you were sold a dream, and then you didn't achieve the dream, and now you're angry at the world. But the dream being sold is a uniquely feminine thing, which is I want to be a dancer. I want to be up in lights. I want to tour Europe. That's
Yeah.
not only women can experience that, but it's something that at this time in history was being very much marketed towards women, with all the dancers and the shows and all that. By the same token, the reasons she can't achieve her dream, at least in her perspective, are also uniquely feminine. She needs to stay home and take care of her father. She needs to be a homesteader, which are also problems that women have faced historically, much more so than men.
Yeah.
So it's like you've taken the framework of the Edgelord, but put both aspects through a female lens, and then the rest of the movie pretty much plays out like any other Edgelord movie was. She slowly destroys herself and everyone around her, like Joker or like Taxi Driver. All these movies do the same thing. I just found that fascinating, and it was the one thing the movie left with me to chew on. There wasn't much else I was left thinking about. That was the only aspect I went to bed, and it was still, I was rattling around in the old brain.
I did have some notes around that as well, that I do think it did a great job of kind of flipping a lot of those tropes, even down to like the fact that it's a, it's a controlling mother who wants you, who, thinks that you're like a vain whore for trying to, achieve stardom, as opposed to like working hard to take care of your family, which feels like a more of a feminine kind of struggle. And then I think the whole thing with the guy, right? It was, I mean, in something like Joker or Taxi Driver, right? It's him meeting a woman, and it's just very different the way it plays out. And they kind of flipped it with her meeting this guy
from the movie theater.
She kind of thought was gonna, for briefly thinks is gonna take her away from all this, and he's strong and confident and whatever. And then it does some interesting flips with that.
Yeah.
And it is a very unique perspective. I mean, there are female-led horror movies, there are female-led like psychotic character pieces, but a lot less.
If only they would just die.
Pardon?
Nothing.
A lot less, and a lot within this specific framework. We're obviously two guys, so if anyone watching this shares this perspective, or we got it totally wrong, we'd love to hear your thoughts, because it's a very interesting thing it tackled, which I guess is a good segue, because I don't think it tackled much else. So I want to move into the bad. Beyond the technical aspects, I hate to admit it, because I really respect this movie and the craft behind it, but I was bored for large portions of this movie because I didn't know what I needed to be interested in. Pearl is the villain, and we're seeing it through her perspective, so there's no tension or suspense because you're riding with the threat. Everyone she harms is external to her, so there's no horror or scares because you're inside the perspective of the biggest threat, and there's no real plot that you're linked with either.
Yeah.
So it's a character study, but those still need something. And I just found myself, I didn't know what to grab onto. So beyond admiring the technical aspects, I found myself a little bit bored throughout, and I was disappointed in that.
It felt a bit like a play almost, and not a particularly great one. Where I didn't know what to look forward to. Like I knew exactly where it was going, and so this is something I can't fully list or good as bad or as good or bad. And I talked about a bit in my intro that I think this movie took a lot of what was unique about X and then just stripped off everything else and focused in on it. So in X, Mia Goth plays Maxine, the younger woman, who is the exact same character. She dreams of stardom. She thinks she's bigger than all this. She doesn't want to be confined to, and she's kind of riding that line between like puppy dog love for the people around her, but then like immediately and angrily rejecting them. It's like the exact same character, and it's
on
good.
Purpose.
Yeah, on purpose. And it's good, but then there's also all these other kind of more stock characters, and it's set where she's this one sort of unusual, interesting character in and amongst a slasher movie cast.
Yeah.
And
including Kid Cudi.
Yeah, Kid Cudi. There's some scenes with him.
There are.
But so that movie, there is kind of that scene-to-scene tension as it's a slasher, and they're getting killed off, and they're trapped, and they're trying to rescue each other, and you're kind of seeing Mia Goth draw you in by being this like two really weird, interesting characters set to this mediocre slasher, rather than try to improve on it and make kind of a more compelling horror thing, which would have been a choice. They just throw all that away, and they're like, there's no backdrop. It's just Mia Goth.
Yeah.
We're just here to watch this character live her life.
Yeah.
And it was definitely intentional. And it wasn't like X had such strong slasher horror fundamentals that I really missed it or think it was just a complete mistake. But you definitely missed out on having it as like the thing pulling you along scene to scene.
And when you throw that out, you also throw out your tension.
Yeah,
Kinda
exactly.
Like it's just, even a mediocre horror movie, I don't think X is mediocre. I think it is better than that.
Yeah.
But let's take a worse movie, a worse horror film. You can still have fun with tension, even if the movie is bad. And I've watched a lot of movies a lot worse than Pearl that I was more entertained by because there was more thrills and excitement. You don't need to do that. Pearl is a horror movie with no scares.
Yeah, it's like gory in some spots.
It's gory, but it's not scary.
Nothing scary.
It is a horror movie. It's not scary. You don't need to be, but then everything else needed to have something else for me to latch onto. I needed to care more about the characters she's engaging with or with individual character conflict in the movie.
Yeah.
There's one scene that does it. When she is arguing with her mom, that was a scene where I was like, if this was a stage play, this would be a great scene.
Yes.
Two great actors going at it, and the arguments they're making are compelling enough that you are hooked in that scene. But outside of that scene, a lot of scenes play out the way you'd expect with no twists or turns, and there's no tension, so I just felt a lot of it fell flat, and they needed to do more like that dinner scene. That was like...
Yeah.
But truth is, I'm not really a good person.
I think it is also tough if you had done, well, I guess I'm about to defeat my own point, but if you had done Taxi Driver as a sequel to a movie where Travis Bickle, I think that's his name, is a murderer, it kind of takes away a lot of the through line.
Yeah.
Joker, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm kind of defeating my own point with Joker because you kind of know where that one's going, but Joker was still very interesting to kind of see where that character ended up because you hadn't seen that interpretation. The fact that you had literally seen Mia Goth playing adult Pearl, living on this farm with her husband, murdering people. There wasn't a lot of...
And that does hurt it.
Yeah.
That you know she's not going to leave the farm.
Yeah.
And that's her whole... There's a tragedy to that. I was empathetic for her when she's dreaming of leaving the farm and she's so hopeful at the beginning. You're like, I've seen X.
Yeah.
I know you're going to be here in like 80 years and it's going to be super sad. There's something there, but it also negates all of the tension and interest in like, is she going to succeed? There's no...
I was almost hoping for a bit of a Tarantino, like, Inglourious Bastards thing where she just actually does just leave the farm.
Yeah.
They just don't address it.
They don't address it. It's like timelines, just whatever.
Yeah, because it happened a couple times where she's like going into town, she's leaving her house, and I'm like, oh, where's she gonna go? Oh, yeah, she doesn't go anywhere. I already know this.
Yeah.
She's just coming back.
Yep.
Okay.
We're looking for someone with X Factor.
Has to be me.
This movie was set during the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that decision quite got there. I don't know if that was made before or after they knew they were shooting it in COVID.
I think it was tongue-in-cheek COVID, kind of. There's even a line about masks.
Yeah.
They wrote this during an actual 2-week quarantine in New Zealand where they couldn't leave the house.
See,
so
I definitely, I just don't think that got anywhere helpful. It just felt like forced wall breaking.
Well,
that didn't serve much for me.
It gave a little bit of credence to her mother not wanting her to leave the house. It gave her a very reasonable reason for that. So there's some plot element to it.
I think that if you're gonna make a movie that references COVID, especially now, well, and this isn't necessarily the filmmaker's fault, but the way I feel is if I'm gonna watch a movie that talks about COVID, just kind of like winking at it without saying something meaningful about it, I didn't love. It just kind of took me out of it.
Yeah, that was cute for 2 weeks. And now it's over, right?
And fair enough, this movie came out a while ago, so it might have made more sense at the time. But in watching it where they're just like, oh, you know, wear your mask going into town, and I'm like, shut up, movie. I don't want to think about that.
Yeah. I'll say this. I'm very excited to check out what Ty West is doing next, because, I mean, I didn't love this movie, but he executed on the part that's like, not harder, but to make a movie look this good and do like really crazy, interesting color grading, because he edited the film as well, which I found interesting. To do that, that's something indie directors struggle a lot with. Like sometimes indie films will have great scripts and ideas, but they just can't quite get it off the ground on a technical level. How strong this was technically, the techniques he employed on a movie that was basically like a side project for fun.
Yeah.
That just shows like the raw talent he has. And it makes me excited to see like, you know, we're out of COVID now. He has time to kind of take his time with a script. I think he could come up with something like really good next. And I'm excited to see what he works on next, even though I didn't love this.
I completely agree, and I would say the same thing even more so about Mia Goth. I mean, these are the only two movies I've seen with her. I haven't seen Infinity Pool, but I want to. I think she's done some more projects, but this movie really is just someone following her around with a camera. So the final shot of the movie where she just smiles for like a full minute and a half.
Yeah.
They didn't tell her they were doing that. I read this as trivia that he just kept the camera rolling, and if you watch it, like she even like kind of looks back at him like, "Are you gonna cut soon?"
Yeah.
But it's just her face acting for like a full minute and a half.
Yeah.
So she wasn't given much, and she really took what was there and did everything you could with it.
Yeah.
Just all these little scenes and her just flipping from being this adorable Judy Garland schoolgirl to like spit and snot flying, screaming at the top of her lungs, like drop of a hat, and like it was all believable. Even in X as two different people, like I'm very excited to see her in a more developed project.
Yeah.
With more going on.
Yeah, and like, I mean, there's a big monologue in this movie that she delivers. How it ties into the plot didn't work exactly for me, but the monologue itself and her performance was incredible.
Yeah.
And it's one of those shots where you're like, oh, this has been one take for the last 7 minutes. And
Yeah.
my brain is realizing this now. Like this is an impressive feat of acting. Even though I'd kind of checked out of the movie, I was like, good on you, Mia Goth. This is genuinely impressive.
Yeah, when it cut back to Mitzi across the screen, I was like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, there's like a movie going on.
Right, yeah. I think my note for that was just I'm watching Mia Goth's audition tape.
Yeah, that is it. Yeah, this is.
I want to be loved from as many people as possible. But truth is, I'm not really a good person.
Should we move into reviews?
Let's score this dang film.
Okay.
I would love for you to start with your critical score of Pearl.
Critically, I'm going to give this a B-. I think I can't say it failed on enough levels to be a C, and it is kind of an average out situation, but in just showing this to the average person, I just don't think this quite put the work in to be like an average movie even. And yeah, I think that puts it on a B-, where I think I spent more time kind of bummed by the things I wish they'd worked harder on, but not necessarily mistakes, just omissions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, what's your personal?
Personal, I'm going to drop it down a little more to a C+. I don't think this worked for me. I wouldn't rewatch it even with someone who was like excited to watch it. I just think once you've got past watching Mia Goth's monologues, there's just not really much meat on this bone. And I think I've said pretty clearly that this just didn't really resonate with me, and as much as it was fun to watch this character, I definitely didn't identify with it, and I wasn't that excited to kind of see where it went, partially because we know where the character's going. So C+, I respect the things that it did well, but
Well, our scoring's going to line up very similarly this week. My critical score, I'm going to give it a B. I think this is a really solid movie that on a critical level and a technical level executes on a lot of levels really highly. My personal kind of boredom with a lot of the movie, I genuinely could not tell if it was my fault or not. And I was watching it and I'm like, I don't think everyone would be bored by this, but I'm checking out. But I feel like it's personal and I don't know why.
You're not a checker-outer, though.
I know, and I'm not a checker-outer.
I'm a checker-outer. You're not a checker-outer.
I don't usually. So that was odd, but I could recognize it as a very personal issue, even though I couldn't put my finger on it. So I'm going to give this movie a B. It's really well put together. It should have been a short film. This could easily have been an A short.
Yeah, the fact that it was an hour and 40 minutes and it felt too long, that's tough.
I did check the clock twice, and that tells you something. Where I was
Yeah.
like, how much is left? Because I don't really know where we're at. But I'm going to give it a B because it's a really well-made film. It didn't work for me. I'm also going to do my personal as a C+. Because the plus is that I really did appreciate all the technical stuff. It was beautiful to look at. There was... Like I said, I could just watch this movie on mute pretty happily to see the set design, the color grading, all of that. There's a couple scenes I would rewatch for her performance, but overall it didn't really work for me. I was kind of bored. Kind of like you said, I could see the movie it maybe could have been, even though I couldn't tell you exactly what it needed to do. And I
They
was
are
left
making another one. They've announced Maxine with 3 X's.
Yes.
So I really hope that they kind of introduce more things in order to, like, around Mia Goth to turn it into a full movie.
Yeah.
So
And it's going to be interesting because X was set in the 70s, I believe.
Yeah.
Right? Set in
Yes.
the 70s. And it was shot like a 70s film. It was like, it was shot in the way that looked like handheld film camera, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Southern Gothic.
Yep.
They chased that aesthetic, they nailed it. This movie, they went for the 30s, 40s Technicolor, nailed it.
Yeah.
Maxine, I have to think he'll do another approach. Like
80s.
I think,
It's set in the 80s.
okay, and is it shot like an 80s movie? Because
It's gonna be shot like RoboCop.
it has like just following the pattern. Clearly, that's his kind of thing. Is he's finding different aesthetics. I'm willing to bet Maxine is going to be 80s glossy neon.
I guess like Dirty Dancing is probably a better guess for the aesthetic they're gonna go for.
It's going to be
Or like it was Flashdance 80s, like something like that.
maybe it'll
that.
be. But I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check it out. We'll probably cover it on the show.
Now I will say one thing that we've both done a little bit, especially around Halloween time. We're having some friends over. We like throwing on some horror movies just on mute in the background
Yeah.
as like set dressing. This might be the best movie ever for that.
It would.
This would be perfect. You
Yeah.
just every time you look over, you're like, oh, look at that.
Look, doesn't that look nice?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, someone's head gets cut off.
Yeah,
And you're
exactly.
like, oh, it's a horror movie.
Halloween, yeah. So if we added a third review for that specific criteria, A+.
A plus. Thanks for watching along. This has been Green Takes. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon with other movie stuff.
Good point. I don't think so.